Today, Gil talks to Nolan Bushnell, an entrepreneur, inventor, and technology pioneer. In 1972, Nolan co-founded Atari and helped turn electronic gaming into a $350 billion industry. 5 years later, he co-founded Chuck E. Cheese, which currently operates more than 500 locations worldwide. Today, Nolan continues to innovate with the launch of Exodexa, an adaptive learning platform that gamifies the learning process. Enjoy!
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Dyslexic Design Thinking. Nolan, so good to have you. Let's jump right in. I've known you for all my life and been inspired by everything you do and read about you and seen all your lectures and podcasts and everything else, and you speak so much about your career. I think that today I would love to speak about your career, but really focus about how dyslexia shaped it, because this is about the dyslexia innovation, positivity, and how can we inspire the next generations of entrepreneurs and technologists and creators to learn from your lessons?
Look, yeah, and I think in reality, you can look at dyslexia as a handicap or as a superpower, and I think like everybody, I was in the blue reading group in the first grade.
Mm-hmm.
The dumb boys.
Same.
And but my mother was a school teacher, and she somehow understood it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think she had a deeper understanding of dyslexia because my dad, who ran a very successful construction company, couldn't read and write as an adult. And so when and basically by the time I was in the second grade, I was in the red reading group, which was the smart guys. So I think that her intervention was really beneficial to me.
Mm.
And it was a thing where I have 5 sons. All of them are dyslexic to some level.
Okay.
And we had this tutor that had a system with a funny alphabet. And literally by the time they were in the second grade, all of them were reading at speed.
Amazing.
So getting the right tools at the right time. And I've actually asked myself the question, can AI provide that tutoring to young dyslexics?
Mm-hmm.
Because one thing, having a tutor, that's expensive, so it's not available to everybody.
That's right.
Yet, I think dyslexia comes to, it's very genetic, and I'm sure that there are a lot of underperforming kids who don't have the resources to have that special skill. So I think AI may be a real help here.
Yeah. I love that you brought that in right at the start here, because I think that, and the fact that you mentioned that it's a superpower, because I think it's probably part of the secret to your massive successes, be able to see things outside the norm, not even coloring within the lines, coloring new lines, and finding ways around industries, around problems that were never done, and says, why not? Let me do it, and let me try to reinvent it. And back to, to AI, it's one thing to learn how to deal with this linear language thing, which is in many ways, very difficult for dyslexic, because we think in 3-dimensional, we think in nonlinear ways. We see above and below all these characters. But when you bring an eye to it, it allows us then to interpret not only what the sentence says, but explore the story beneath the story. Do you use AI every day?
I call it the meta game. There's the game and everything, and then there's the meta game as well. I used to play tournament chess.
Okay.
I played number 2 board for the university when I was in college, and I would always mess with my opponent. And you know, supposedly Casablanca messed with his opponents with a big nasty cigar and several things. But what I would do is, you know, you write down your moves on a piece of paper, and when you make a really good move, you put an exclamation point next to it. When somebody makes a bad move, you put a question mark there. And so I would randomly put question marks against other guys and exclamation points at various random things. And it would just mess with, because they'd just be able to see what you put down. And they said, oh, he thinks I made a mistake. And I was just doing a random response.
And then they obviously probably not dyslexic, being like, maybe I did make a mistake, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Totally changed the game. Yeah. What was some of your inspiration earlier on? I mean, I love that your mom was a teacher and saw your brilliance and support you in sort of the traditional learning thing. But did you have other inspiration earlier on that sort of set your vision toward entrepreneurship and in those early days?
Yeah. I look at several points in my life as being epiphanies.
Okay.
And probably the most pivotal epiphany was Mrs. Cook's third grade class. And she had a magic science box. And her methodology was to let one student take the magic science box, and there was a little pamphlet there, and she assigned me to do the unit on electricity. So I got to play with the dry cells and the wire and the switches and the little lights and the little motor and what have you. And so I put them together, and I was hooked. I went home that day, and I set up a card table in the middle of my bedroom, and I collected every piece of wire, battery, flashlight, light switch that was hanging around and started to tinker, and I never stopped. So that led to my interest in electricity,
Mm-hmm.
which brought me to a neighbor who had a side business buying surplus electronics. I was adjacent to Hill Air Force Base in Utah.
Mm-hmm.
And they were basically having these auctions of selling off obsolete parts from airplanes and what have you. And he would buy them and made a little catalog and sold them. He was a ham radio operator. And so I decided to become a ham radio operator. And what that led me to was the fact that the radios were expensive.
Mm-hmm.
So I looked at my allowance and my lawn cutting money, and I couldn't afford the radios until I was like 40. So I knew I had to do something else, and that led to entrepreneurship. And my idea for entrepreneurship was I had fixed my parents' TV, because in those days they were all tubes, and when TVs went out, it was a tube that had gone bad. And so all you had to do is figure out which tube to replace it, and the TV worked again. And so in those days, a house call, and these were all the TVs were big consoles because that's just the way they were.
Right.
So it was a house call, and a house call was $5. And in order for me to get customers, I priced my house call at 50 cents. Because, it took a little bit of courage to let a 10-year-old come in and work on your TV.
Right.
And so, but then I figured out how to buy tubes cheaply, mark them up. And so by the time I left the house, I'd made about $10 in tube margins.
Wow.
And so I think that set me on a path to entrepreneurship.
Yeah. Where did those ideas come from? Was that just like naturally the way you sort of saw the opportunity, or did you get some guidance from your father or from somebody else in those days?
I don't know. I think that the guy that ran the surplus operation, he was kind of a mentor. He taught me a lot about radios and things like that. And he was the guy that sold me tubes cheaply.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that I don't know. It just, he even sold me a surplus printing press.
Ooh.
And it was a little hand crank thing with the thing, and
Right.
and I printed up flyers to advertise my business. Just stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah. I find that a very common story with a lot of dyslexic. I personally had a very hard time, like you, in reading and writing, but I found that when I found something that I was good at, I just went about it in spades. Like I similarly printed flyers. If I had a lawnmower business, I hired my brother, my neighbor, my cousin, and then I didn't do the lawnmower anymore. I just did, booking. If I had a newsprint business and I can only do a review, I had my friends from school in his neighborhood, and then mark everybody up, and then do the collecting. And I find that was something that came so naturally to me. And everybody was always like, "How you were 10 years old with $100 in your pocket all the time?" I just never realized that I wasn't supposed to do that. Did you have the same experience with your siblings and with your community, or were you unique in that sense at that age?
There's actually an 8-year-old story that I like to tell, in which we always had my mom always had a garden out behind her house. And one night at dinner, she says, we got way too many strawberries. She says, I don't know what I'm going to do with them all. She says, I planted 4 rows and I should have just planted 2. And I didn't think too much about it. And I went to the grocery store with her the next day, and I looked, and they were selling strawberries for 50 cents a basket. And I thought to myself, I guess you'd call that market research.
Mm-hmm.
So I went home, picked a bunch of strawberries, put them in, we had baskets, that my mom kept everything. And so I had these little baskets, and I peddled them door to door. And in about an hour and a half, I'd made $8. And that was in a world in which my allowance was 20 cents a week.
Right. Amazing. Yeah. So maybe that kind of jumps to sort of your obviously iconic Atari and Pong. But before that, it was called Syzygy, right? Am I pronouncing it right?
That's correct.
What drew you to the arcade world? I mean, how did you go from selling strawberries and fixing radios and TV, and how did you kind of get interested in the arcade world?
Well, this is actually a funny one. A lot of times, editing is as good as invention. And as you see something that is done crappy and you say, hey, I can do that better. And I went to my freshman year in college. That summer, I got a job in Salt Lake City, and a friend of mine got a little apartment, and I went up to the university, the campus, and I saw these calendars that were flopping around. They were printed on cheap paper, and it had a calendar of events for the school, and then advertising around. And I thought to myself, gee, if this was on a blotter paper so that it would, you'd put it on your desk, because a lot of times dorms and things like that, the desks are all chewed up, and so they're rough to write on. And I thought, I can do that. And so I started a thing called the Campus Company, which was, and I got the calendar of events, which was available from the administration office, and I sold advertising around it, and the math of it, I could sell $3,000 worth of ads, and it cost me $500 to have them printed, and I'd give them away at the beginning of the quarter. And so I was making a lot of money. I mean, because there were three major universities, and I did all three of them.
Okay.
Two of them were on semester systems, and one was on a quarter system. So, I had a new one each quarter, and each semester. And so I found something that if you take your way, excuse me,
bless you.
If you have I had a proclivity to make money, but I also had a very, very good proclivity of spending money. And so I decided that what I needed was a nighttime job to keep me away from harm. And so I got a job at an amusement park, which I thought was a sucker's job because they paid minimum wage. And I was an entrepreneur, and I was making, but it wasn't about making money. It was about keeping it was kind of a fun job, because and then I found that the pay wasn't so bad, because the minimum wage at that time was $1 an hour. But while that was what your pay was, you got a 25-cent an hour bonus if you made quota. This was in the games department. And then on top of that, every dollar that you exceeded your quota, you got to keep 10% of it. And so I could crash my quota. I mean, because I was a good salesman, and so it turned out that I was making some pretty good money at the amusement park as well. And because I was good at it, they made me assistant manager the following season, and then manager the season after that. And so I had 35, concessions, throwing balls and knocking down milk bottles and what have you. But I also had 2 arcades that reported to me. So I knew the economics of the coin-operated game business. Okay? So all of a sudden I knew the economics of the coin-operated game business. Then a guy named Steve Russell programmed a game called Space War on the big computers. And there was one at the University of Utah. And I saw that and played it, and thought to myself, boy, if I had this in my arcade and put a coin slot on this monitor, it'd make money. But it was $1 million computer and 25 cents for 3 minutes. The math didn't work.
Right.
So, and I call that, I think of the video game being a culmination of happy accidents. I mean, how many electrical engineers were putting themselves through college working in an amusement park? 0, except for me. Then I moved to California and worked for Ampex. And I chose Ampex not because of what they were doing, but because they offered me the most money. So this is the next happy accident. my job at that time was to use these MSI semiconductors using Boolean algebra and things like that to build little circuits. They weren't truly von Neumann architecture, but they were like state machines. And I figured out, I got thinking, hey, you know, I believe I can do a video game. And so my emulation was Space War, and that became Computer Space.
Amazing. It's, you know, you keep referring to these things as happy accidents. And one of the things I find very common, and I wonder if this is the same experience that you have, is that dyslexics, we don't go in a linear line. So we tend to sort of veer and we stay open and we see opportunities because we're not going linearly toward a destination. We're just sort of looking around. It's like, oh, what about this? And what about that? We almost get curious. We see things that lights up to us to say, you know, I can sell the strawberries. I can, you know, I can sell more TVs. I can, you know, start here, but then go over there, and seeing that opportunity. It's a very different direction than most, where you kind of go to university and you know what you want to do. It's almost like you exploring in your own mind and what's happening, and you're allowing that to create, as you said beautifully, these happy accidents.
Yeah.
But it seems like because in your story, it's such a continuation or consistency. I bet it's more of the gift than just sort of happened to you, or being at the right place at the right time, or just being fortunate, right? Would you agree with that observation?
Well, you know, I have 5 sons and 3 daughters, and my advice to them has always been just do a lot of different things.
Mm-hmm.
And you never know when those dots are going to converge in the right spot. Just do a lot of different things. And I've actually been, you know, I've been doing this thing that I call the, you know, it's basically a silly thing that I have a series of small projects that can be accomplished part-time in a year. And this started when I started looking at how the brain works.
Mm-hmm.
And as you get older, you want to get older, but you don't want to get dumber. And so the best way to build your brain is to have a variety of different experiences and learn different things. And so I have all these things that I do, and I pull 11 of them out of a hat. I number them 2 to 12, and then I throw the dice, because I don't want my brain to cheat on doing something that's easy.
Right.
And then I have to do it. And it has been an absolute godsend to me.
Mm.
Because what happens is you think of things that are being sort of outside of your purview.
Mm-hmm.
But once you start down the path, all of a sudden things open up. As an example,
Mm-hmm.
one year it said write a book. Well, when you write a book, you're thinking, oh, it's going to be published, and I've got something to say, and what have you. I would have never graduated from college because I don't spell. My grammar is horrible. And so the whole idea of being a literate person was just not even part of my reality. But when you start out and you say, okay, I have to write a book. And so I read a lot of science fiction. So I wrote a book that was science fiction. And once you go down that path, pretty soon you say, oh, there are editors that can take care of all that grammar stuff that
Mm-hmm.
you had at. and maybe I can get it published. And so I had a friend who was in the publishing business, and he said, you need to start out nonfiction instead of fiction. And so it led to me writing Finding the Next Steve Jobs. It was picked up by Simon and Schuster, and was on the New York Times bestseller list. And I was a published author, and I made some money on it.
I'm not surprised. I mean, I want to go back because that's such a beautiful thing you do with throwing these ideas or these initiatives into a hat and then pick them out. So a couple of questions for our audience, because I think that what you're doing is you're pretty much feeding your dyslexia. You know, instead of trying to, shift it to not being multi-thinking, you say, okay, what can I do in a random pattern to inspire more random accidents, right? So when you taking these ideas, I mean, do you do it throughout the year? You write an idea and you put in a hat, and then come the first of the year, you pull one out? Or tell me the mechanics so our audience, young and younger, can kind of be inspired by this really great tool.
Well, I've actually been thinking that I might actually write a book on how to do this, and develop the creative process. And then I make lists of the kinds of things I do. It's a random thing, like learn 1,000 words in a foreign language.
Wow.
Or 2,000. Learn how to play a wild rover on a guitar.
Right.
Create and sell a piece of art.
Okay.
And I put the sell in there because I think that is where it kind of disciplines you.
Right.
So those are the kinds of things that I have on there. And the other thing that I do just recently is I've had some business major successes. I've had a couple of pratfalls, and 60 miles an hour into a brick wall. And trying to analyze both of those, it turned out that my successes were right time, right place, right people. My failures were wrong time, wrong place, wrong people. And so I got thinking, okay, how do I guard against that? And the answer came back, and it may not be the ultimate answer, but it's an answer. The idea is that for a business, if you only have one idea, the only time is now.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have multiple ideas, you can wait for the right time, right place, right people. And so what I do now is, if I get an idea for a business, I do a business plan, and I put it on the shelf. I call it my marinade pile. And then I wait until one of them speaks to me based on right time, right place, right people.
I love that. I love the idea that you want to turn your what do you call the list in the hat? Do you have a name for it?
Not really. I mean, I probably should.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll think about that.
I'm sure it'll come to you, but I love that idea, and I love the idea that it's a book. Maybe it's a book plus, some tools to do so. Look, you don't have to be dyslexic to feed your curiosity. And as you said, as we get older, keep ourselves sharp and interested and curious and wanting to explore the world around us is what keeps us the vitality going. And I think that's a beautiful thing to do at any age, and you don't have to be dyslexic to play this game. And I like the fact that these ideas that you're putting in the hat are you have to climb that mountain. It's not a quick thing, it's not an easy thing, but it's a commitment, and then you're doing it. And a lot of times I find that the hardest thing is to start. As
Yeah.
soon as you start, then the rest of it unfolds the way it unfolds. You just have to kind of get over that sort of barrier of saying like, how I'm going to do that. Just do it. And the first thing I try to do is do it and fail, because at least by failing, you're trying. And then, of course, it's not true failure. It's just the evolution of the idea that you're going to have to explore. So I love that you're doing it. And I would love to see your list over the years and the things that didn't make it and the things that you did take on, and learn how to do these different projects and such. You mentioned that I know you worked earlier on with Atari with Steve Jobs. I was wondering, Steve Jobs is also dyslexic. Did you find that working with dyslexic sort of was easy for you? Did you know he was dyslexic? Did you guys ever kind of mind meld your similarities and differences?
Steve Jobs and I had a lot of conversations where I had a minor in philosophy, and so I read Nietzsche and Kant and Kierkegaard and Camus and Locke and all these guys. And so we used to talk a lot about the different ways of thinking. I think that Steve possessed a very, very clear and focused mind. He was not always a nice guy. And the thing about it, he respected me. So I never saw the bad side of Steve like a lot of the people that worked with him did.
Mm-hmm.
And, but we always had a special relationship.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you were saying earlier that you were not aware that he was dyslexic as well, huh?
No, did not know.
Yeah, interesting. In retrospect, it's like I've talked to so many dyslexic in so many different industries around the world, and I find that most people, when they think dyslexia, learning disability, reading and writing and spelling and all that, but then the other part of their life is often is quite successful in different industries, and that's also your dyslexia, because your brain is dyslexic brain, and you think everything through that same brain.
Yeah.
So there's certain things you can't do, and then there's other things you overachieve immensely. So it's interesting to always find the similarities about how we think, and we also we don't know it's dyslexia. It's part of the commonality there. I want to jump to some of the lessons you had from running Atari, and then what lesson? Maybe I'll ask you another way. What lesson did you learn from Atari that you brought into Chuck E. Cheese?
Well, I think the biggest lesson I learned was how to let go.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say let go, I think when you are an entrepreneur, your first business, you tend to be a control freak. And being a control freak does not scale. And so once you exceed 50 employees, if you don't start letting go, you end up with a real shit show. Mm-hmm. And so running a multi-unit operation at Chuck E. Cheese is the ultimate in letting go. You have to create an ethos and require your managers to follow that ethos, and somehow figure out a feedback mechanism so that you can discipline the malperformers and you can reward the performers. Mm-hmm. And which brings me back to another happy accident. And that is that Atari really started in 1972. And it was right in the middle of the hippie revolution. Like we all had our poser costume where we would dress up like hippies and go up to Haight-Ashbury and, Summer of Love and all that. But one of the ethos of the hippie movement was change things. Mm-hmm. And so what we decided to do at Atari was to be the ultimate meritocracy. That merit was the only thing that we cared about. And so what that led to is a whole series of things that really changed the society of Silicon Valley for the better.
Mhm.
And it was, we don't care when you come to work. We don't care if you come to work. We don't care what you wear. We don't care, what you do. If you perform and are excellent at your job, that's the only thing. And what that does is it totally gets rid of discrimination,
Hmm.
of, sexual bias, race, creed, country of origin, didn't matter.
Right.
And so in some ways it didn't start out being this, new age, kind of way of thinking, but it was.
Right.
And it really, I think, created a whole bunch of really good processes in Silicon Valley.
Mhm.
Because Steve took that process to Apple. And at that time, between Apple and Atari, we probably had a third of the workforce. And so everybody looked at us and we were pretty successful. They said, well, maybe we should copy it. And so it became an ethos of Silicon Valley for the better.
Mhm. Mhm. And did you bring that sort of mentality to Chuck E. Cheese?
Absolutely.
Yeah. 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 I know that last year you launched a new platform, a new gaming platform, Exodexa.
Yeah.
And I love the idea that that's helps you learn and better understand, so you can retain the concept, which is a very dyslexic thing, right? When I
Exactly.
understand the story, not the written story, but the story, I don't forget it, because I can kind of viscerally understand the concept and I can retain it. Some people call it photographic memory, but it's not. It's, yes, I think in visuals, but my whole body understands the lesson. Tell me about the platform. Tell me what catalyzed it, and how did you bring some of the ideas of the gaming industry into this modality?
There are two or three things that are, I told you I did a lot of research on how the brain works, that led to the hat and the issues. But the other thing that I found is that you remember 5% of what you hear, 10% of what you see, 80% of what you do. So what you really want to be able to do is turn learning things into problems. Well, that's where video games come in. And video games know how to make things addictive. And you do that through this concept of flow, which was pioneered by or defined by this guy named Makai Csikszentmihalyi, who was a Hungarian PhD in the University of Chicago. And he basically says that if you keep things challenging, not too hard, not too soft, kind of like Goldilocks, if you keep things in the Goldilocks pond, people will get into the state of flow, and all of a sudden time truncates or dilates, and you just basically go into this trance, and that is the ultimate learning modality.
Mm.
And so what we're doing with Exodexa is to create games that suck you in, and an hour later, Western philosophy, history, and some mathematics.
I love that. And how is the platform being received? How is it? How is it going?
We're actually we're just in beta tests right now because it's not complete.
Okay.
But come back probably midsummer is when we'll really go live and big.
I love that. I would love to get my hands on that and try that. I'm working as I'm sure you as well. I'm working a lot with young adults, young children
Yeah.
around embracing their strengths, because I find that when you find your strengths, happy accidents, going toward what gives you joy, just try many things, as you said in the beginning of the conversation, and find the things that makes you more you, and then feed it. You are feeding your gift, and you're feeding your learning, and you are, and you get curious, and when you're curious you learn, and when you learn you remember, when you're learning you expand. And I think it's such a dyslexic thing. Again, you don't have to be a dyslexic to embrace that learning methodology, but starting from the strength-based model is much easier than to climb the differences and the challenges. um,
Well, if you measure success,
mhm,
one of the there's things there's curiosity, and curiosity is the forcing function of knowledge. Second, there's grit, and playing games actually helps you with that, because you learn that you can fail, and you set the pieces up and you play again. The third thing that's necessary is optimism, because you have to believe that you can do it.
right.
I always say probabilistically, and I say, okay, and I think that facing your fears is really an important thing. So you say, okay, I'm going to start this, but I believe there's a 20% chance that I'll fail, and failure is going to look like this. Try to define that.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the other side, you say, and if it goes really well, what does that look like?
Mm-hmm.
And it looks like I become Elon Musk. And anyway, that's kind of one of the rubrics that I would like to teach and everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Have grit, be optimistic, be curious, be realistic.
Beautiful. When did it click to you that dyslexia was a positive rather than a negative?
I really hadn't really thought about it. It was just who I was.
Yeah.
And I actually use that saying because in my mind, I had left my dyslexia behind in the second grade once I became reading at proficiency.
Mm-hmm.
But I now know that the dyslexic mind is a mind construct that is forever.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What do you think makes dyslexics such good entrepreneurs?
I think connecting disparate dots.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think that, I've got another story that I think you'd probably like. It's about how your mind is malleable.
Mm-hmm.
And that a lot of times when we first did the consumer Pong, we presented it to Sears. And my head of manufacturing and Sears asked us, how many can you build? And my head of manufacturing, I said, I don't know. And I huddled with my head of manufacturing. He says, probably 25,000. And so when I went back in, I said, we probably could do about 75,000. He came back with an order for 150,000.
Wow.
And so all of a sudden you get an order for 150,000. And I said, how do we do this? And it turned out that year we made 180,000 Pong units.
Wow.
So again, why? Because he ordered them. Second thing, in terms of your brain, I used to have these planning sessions, and we'd rent a house in Bahara Dunes, which is kind of a little seaside community. just far enough away that you couldn't go home for the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And we'd stay there, and we'd make lists of games that we could build, or projects, not just not limited to just games. And just before lunch, I'd say, okay, now we've made lists of all the good games. Now I want you to create a list, and we need 10 of the craziest ideas you can think of. They all and they can't be normal. They have to be batshit crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And we get 10 of them. We'd have lunch. And then when we came back from lunch, I'd take that bottom 10 and say, okay, now we have to build one of these. But they're batshit crazy. Yeah, but we have to build one of them because I'm batshit crazy. And when you label something batshit crazy, you think of all the things that are wrong with it.
Mm.
But if all of a sudden we turn your brain around and say, okay, now what's good about these? And I'd say that every time that we did that, I mean, every time, 100% of the time,
Mm-hmm.
the game that we came up with, or the project that we came up with from the batshit crazy list, outperformed the ones that were on the better list.
Hmm.
Because they were different. Entertainment, games, what have you, are driven by novelty.
Mm-hmm.
And so you get more novel stuff on the batshit crazy list.
Mm. I love that.
Are those fun little stories?
Yeah, I love that so much because I think that when you start with why we can't do it, then where is it going to take you? You're starting with, that it's not doable, all the mechanics, all the devil advocates, all that. That's the opposite of creativity and expansion. But when you give yourself the permission to say, come up with something out of this world crazy, then you suspend gravity, suspend the rules of your experiences before based on habitual practices. And all of a sudden you come something that's so outside the box that not only the idea is inspiring, but it catalyzes you to be inspired to achieve it.
Yeah.
Which again, I think it's such a dyslexic thing. For us, often it's like, give me the idea that sort of allows to change the reality and how it's going to unfold. It's like Ulysses, the happy accidents. That will be the happy accident thereafter. Such an inspiring story, and I think we all experience those so often. But our fears hold us back, and we says, you know what? I don't know. Maybe I'll fail. Let me not try, so I don't fail. I'm interesting as we come into the top of the hour to talk about what excites you with today's technology and what's coming up next.
There are basically three things. And I'm I've always been fascinated by robotics.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always been fascinated with AI.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I had a project, I did a board game using the Amazon Echo as the environment. And I can't say the A word, otherwise it'll start talking to me. And it was called Saint Noir. And it was really fun. And it wasn't true AI, but it had very, very good speech recognition. And we had over 80 hours. And so the game was to verbally interrogate suspects.
Oh.
And the suspects had to tell the truth, but the perp could lie. And so it was finding who was the liar. It's a fun game.
Yeah.
But and then I think that I'm on the board of directors of a self-driving car company, Prone Robotics, and in some ways, self-driving cars are more important than world peace, because more people are killed on the highway than have been killed in wars.
Wow.
So if you just count the death toll, self-driving cars take care of that. And so the three things that are really interesting to me are AI and how you can, and I look at AI kind of like a bicycle for your brain. It's just a force multiplier on so many things. Mm-hmm. And I look at self-driving cars as AI for safety and convenience. Mm-hmm. And then I look at just plain robotics as a way to make us all richer. Mm-hmm. Because if you can take drudgery out of a lot of jobs, then, I mean, we have so much that we need to do to create the world that I want to live in. Mm-hmm. And the old story is, if you want to live in the future, invent it. And so that's kind of my three big ones. And I think that we're going, the issue really is how adaptable to change is the population. Mm-hmm. If it changes too fast, it causes real problems. Mm-hmm. But yet, and I feel like, self-driving technology over time will eliminate 15 million jobs. Mm-hmm. Now, if you eliminate 15 million jobs in a year, that's a big problem.
Right. Well, I really, really appreciate you. I appreciate everything you've been doing and your time today, sharing your amazing stories with our audience. Absolutely inspiring. And I know that a lot of your ideas and a lot of your tools are going to help tremendously for children and adults with learning differences. I love the idea of happy accidents. Maybe that's the name of your next book.
Yeah.
List, because you mentioned it so often. And I think it's really kind of intersections of astonishment, ideas, and risk-taking. So I thought that was really cool. But thank you so much, Nolan, for joining us today. It was beautiful.
My pleasure. Great fun.
Have a wonderful one.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
If you enjoyed our conversation today, be sure to subscribe to this series wherever you get your podcasts. Visit DyslexicDesignThinking.com to learn more about our latest initiatives, including Dear Dyslexia, the Postcard Project, or to book Gil to speak at your next event or conference. Stay connected on Instagram at Dyslexic Design Thinking, or drop us a line at dyslexic@gershoni.com to receive our monthly newsletter and learn more about our upcoming programming. Dyslexic Design Thinking is produced by Gershoni Creative. Until next time, be well.